Hello, Bobs. We're back with Shakespeare's Sweet Art, chapter 17. Oh, look, nice illustration, but that's halfway through. His wedded lady. An instant thus we stood. Then Count William's voice broke the spell that bound us. What means this, he said. Thy kindliness of heart, Will, hath made thee strangely forgetful of friendship's ties. Release the lad and let me conclude his punishment. The watch, cried a boy's shrill voice suddenly on the outskirts of the crowd. The watch approaches. The Count stood his ground, not so the idle rabble that surrounded us. They gave cries of alarm in various keys, and melted away like dew before the sun. The man who had lent the sword to me left it where it lay and fled. Count William sheathed his and folded his arms. When at length the officers of the law did approach, puffy and important, he bestowed a gold piece or two upon them, which instantly rendered them blind and obsequious. At their departure, he turned to me again. I had raised my head, but still stood with Will's arm encircling me in protecting fashion. The Countess had sunk down on the church steps and sat there pale and erect, awaiting the outcome of the scene. Now 'tis quiet enough in all conscience, and the watch will not trouble us again. Pick up thy sword, Cesario. Nay, interposed Will, releasing me and himself taking up the weapon. Nay, Will, if thou art bent on fighting, thou must e'en fight me. The Count stared at him in utter amazement. The Countess rose from where she sat and came forward. And why? The former demanded at last, recovering his voice. Will put his arm around me again. Because, he answered, because I know not how nor why, but a miracle hath been wrought. An instant since Cesario, my page, stood here. Now 'tis Anne Shakespeare, my dear and honored wife. I gave a cry and again hid my glowing face upon his shoulder. The Count was silent from sheer amazement, but I felt his eyes upon me. The Countess gave a curious cry, whether of pain or surprise or disappointment. Nay, if thou art bent on fighting, thou must even fight me. The Countess gave a curious cry, whether of pain, of surprise, or disappointment. It would be difficult to say. I raised my head again and looked at her. She was staring at me, her eyes large, her face pale. A woman, she muttered as if to herself. A woman! Then she paused, and her expression became inscrutable and mocking as of old. She gave a hard little laugh. I have been the heroine of a pretty comedy, it seems, she said, her eyes still full upon me and her face ablaze with anger. Then suddenly her expression softened and grew curiously wistful. "'Tis a paradise I cannot share," she said slowly, and she meant our love, methinks. I might have known it. Only the innocent can enter those white gates. I dreamed that I might, but I was wrong. The truest love of my poor sinful soul has been given to a shadow. She came towards us and gave her hand to Will to kiss. He bent over it obediently. Then suddenly she leaned forward, and once again, for the last time, her lips touched mine. "Farewell, my shadow love," she said, smiling somberly, "and farewell, Mistress Shakespeare. Love and loyalty are altogether dreams, though I have sometimes thought them so. Your secret is safe, Cesario." Her face was convulsed with grief for an instant as she looked at me. It was as if she gazed on the corpse of one beloved, and so indeed she did. Then, composing herself, she bowed slightly to each of us and went down the street alone. We stood watching her until the last glimmer of her scarlet robe had disappeared. Then Count William broke into a cry. "Ah, Will, I love her still. What shall I do to make her mine?" Will shook his head and laid his hand with a caressing gesture upon the Count's shoulder. "Patience, Will, patience. She is broken now over the shattering of her dream, but that she could love even a shadow so sincerely shows that her heart is noble, as I have deemed it ever. Surely thy love devotion will touch her at last. Wait and love." As thy lady here hath done, said the Count, courteously interrupting. He knelt before me. Mistress Shakespeare, I know not how nor why thou wearest this disguise, but thy secret is safe with me also. I hope thou wilt forgive my hasty rudeness a while since. Prithee remember I laboured under a mistake. I gave him my hand and smiled in token of forgiveness. He pressed his lips upon it and then rose. Farewell, Will, he said, drawing his cloak about him. Farewell until noon. Ah, where now will be thy performance at the palace? Will's face fell, and he looked at me in comical perplexity. Nay, I said readily, although I blushed. Why need any change be made? None knows who I am save you two and the Countess, and none need be told. Let the play go on. Will shook his head doubtfully, but his face cleared in spite of himself. The lady is wise, said Count William. Let it be as she says, Will. Thou canst get no other Juliet at this late hour, and the change would create comment. So be it then, said Will. Thou'st play thy part so well, Nan, that 'twill do no harm to play it a little longer. Then to Stratford, and an end to mysteries. Again applauding his decision, Count William bowed and left us. We watched him also out of sight, his golden hair and gleaming blue satin shining in the sun. Then Will turned to me. Sweetheart, he said, and his tone was as love-filled as of old. Sweetheart, what means it all? I am bewildered. Prithee, enlighten my darkness. We began to walk down the street together. It grows near noon, I answered, and we shall not have time for many words now. But ere I enlighten thy darkness, thou must let the sun rise on mine. And then, as we went slowly towards the boat landing, I told him all that had happened in those dreary months since we parted. I began with the conversation I had overheard beside the willows, then followed the story of my madness, at which he groaned and murmured words of love and commiseration. Finally, I narrated how and why I had come to London. Then I paused an instant and looked at him. Will, I said, and my voice trembled, betraying the anguish that had tormented me so long, thou seemst thy old dear self to me, and yet, didst thou ever love her? He looked at me with so amazed an expression that my question was answered before he spoke. Never, he said, and his voice was as wondering as his face. Then, in a pained way, Nan, hadst no faith in my truth and honor? Forgive me, I murmured with instant repentance. Forgive me. And yet perhaps thou wert justified, she thought. Too, that I loved her for a while, he went on, half to himself. So did Count William at one time. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted. Hast thou, the master mistress of my passions, a woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false woman's fashion, an eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. A man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. He paused and turned to me, his face illumined. 'Twas of Count William I wrote thus, Nan, he said. It's not true. Hath he not a woman's face and beauty, and a woman's gentle heart? Ah, loyal, loving friend! Deem not, however, dearest, that I thought of thee when I spoke of false women. Nay, 'tis the majority I mean, and Nan, thou hast been a lad in London long enough to know that of most women it is sooth. But the Countess, what of her? I said with diffidence. The Countess? Ah, he said with the same strange, speculative look he had worn before when speaking of her. How sweet and lovely dost thou make the shame, which, like a canker in a favourite rose, doth spot the beauty of thy budding name. Oh, and what sweets dost thou thy sins enclose? He paused again and looked at me with a curious expression. Dost understand? He said. I did, as in a lightning flash. Many things I had not comprehended were now made clear. I remembered the Countess's singular freedom of dress and manner, and how she had come alone at nightfall to Will's lodgings. I recalled the tragic despair with which she had spoken of her poor sinful soul a short space since. Not of ordinary human frailty are such tones used. I looked at Will in sudden, wide-eyed comprehension. Yet, I began doubtfully, she lives in a right stately house. She's called the Countess. And 'tis no nickname, interrupted Will, and 'tis in the halls of her ancestors that she dwells. Sorrow and anguish she hath brought to her proud house. And yet, despite all, she hath a noble heart. She gave it freely to thee in thy disguise, and some day, perhaps, Count William. He fell into a thoughtful silence, looking into space with the calm, large gaze that saw broader and deeper than other men, but I could not forbear interrupting his reverie. Although my doubts as to his loyalty were laid at rest, my curiosity was not yet satisfied. But Will, I said, Will, thou didst long so far her miniature. Thou didst bid me keep it safely. Oh, and she deemed that thou didst love her. And Count William, that day by the globe, when thou first didst send me to her, he laughed and patted me lightly on the cheek. What, sweeting, still wondering? Listen, then, and learn all the heart of thy true lover in a few words, as brief as may be. Count William was kind to me. When I first came to London, among other things, as our friendship grew, he confided to me his passion for the Countess. I visited her with him. For a time, I think her fancy was taken by me, and so thought Count William, while he labored under this delusion. He was nobly willing to leave the field to me. He begged, however, that he might have the miniature, which she had lightly offered to me as a keepsake one day. 'Twas this conversation thou didst overhear between us, and thou hadst left us. Then I told him in confidence of my marriage and my undying love for thee. Since that day he has known that my heart was never hers, nor ever would be. That night, when she came to my lodgings, 'twas to seek thee, as I know now. Then I could not understand her appearance, but seized the opportunity to plead Count Williams's cause. I did not know then why my words were so unavailing. 'Twas because Cesario filled her heart and mind. And now, poor, noble, misguided soul, what will be the end? Again he sank into thought, but again I was not quite satisfied. But Will, I said timidly, thou didst visit her? Thou didst write poetry about her? Count William and she both thought? He turned to me with a swift, indignant gesture. Nan, he said in a tone of quiet reproach, Nan, have I deserved this? Nay, as I instantly craved his pardon, let us make an end, for our comrades wait. And in a few minutes more thou must be Cesario again, and Romeus and Juliet, Jesus Christ, and Romeus and Juliet must fill all our thoughts. Ever in body and soul have I been loyal to thee, Nan. Never hath the day passed since our parting that thy image hath not been in my heart, and thy long mysterious silence has caused me bitter grief. Yet for thy own sake I could not leave London. Jesus, thou hast seen how I am bound by the theatre, and lately by my illness. As for the Countess, my name has indeed been coupled with hers, for I frequently accompanied Count William on his visits to her. Never hath it been so associated with just reason, though, I swear, I have sought to further his cause. The poetry I have just now said to thee was written for that purpose. All the interviews, few in number, I have ever had with the Countess alone, have been towards the same end. There is another reason, I freely admit it. His face lit with mysterious fire as I had seen it oft at Stratford when he told me of his dreams. The reason I may tell to thee alone, Nan, he went on slowly. None other would understand. I am a poet, Nan. All nature is the book I read. And all mankind, naught is too high, naught too low for me to find of interest and of value. Each man and woman, every tree and flower, all words and gestures that I see and hear are preserved in the world that lives within my heart and soul. There are many figures in it, Nan, and many scenes. Some of our Stratford walks and talks dwell there, and London haunts of vice and sorrow. Our love story and Count William's are constantly relived in that world within. Jack Falstaff, humorist and traitor, exists in my dream universe, and the Countess, mocking and inscrutable, and I think of all these, and many others, and live with them, and strive to enter into their minds and souls, and then, his tone, which had been exalted and mysterious, broke off with a little laugh. He ended in matter-of-fact fashion. And someday, I hope, in one way or another, this dream world shall materialize into comforts for thee and the babe, sweetheart, and that Will Shakespeare shall become a respectable Stratford citizen. I leaned against him in perfect content. We had reached the boat landing now, and the little craft he had signaled to take us to the theater was coming rapidly towards us. And so he ended, the Countess is not the one woman in the world for me, as thou art, beloved, but she is one of many whom it is alike my pleasure and my business to study and to admire. Art satisfied now, sweetheart, sweetheart? Ah, I love thee better for thy jealousy. Thou wert less a woman without it, but it was groundless, dear. Listen, among the poems I have written for Count William and his wooing, now and again I have slipped interludes, which are for thee and me. Canst guess of whom this speaks? The river lay fair and sparkling in the noon sunlight. I stood gazing at it dreamily, recalling how, a few hours since, I had thought to seek its waters to still the anguish of my heart forever. Ah, what a contrast was the happy present, while the voice dearest to me in all the world murmured in my ear the last conclusive witness of his loyalty and love. From you I have been absent in the spring, when proud-pied April, dressed in all his trim, hath put a spirit of youth in everything. That heavy Saturn laughed and leaped with him. Yet, nor the lays of birds, nor the sweet smell of different flowers in odor and in hue, could make any summer's story tell, or from their proud lip pluck them where they grew. Nor did I wonder at the lilies white, nor praise the deep vermilion in the rose. They were but sweet, but figures of delight, drawn after you, you pattern of all those. Yet seemed it winter still, and you away, as with your shadow I with these did play. Very sweet, Will, very sweet. All right, bruvs. On to chapter 18, 19, and that will conclude it. No, maybe there's a chapter 20. Yeah, chapter 20 is the last. So 3 more chapters. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.